The night Vivian Whitmore made her twin sister the punchline of a joke, she never imagined the man sitting across from Evelyn would be the one to end her. Vivian had planned it for weeks, a fake blind date, a borrowed dress, a restaurant full of people who would watch and laugh. She had even set up the camera angle herself, making sure the lighting was perfect not for Evelyn's sake, but for the footage. She wanted the humiliation preserved. She wanted to watch it again later. That was the kind of woman Vivian had become, someone who needed proof of other people's pain to feel good about her own life. What she did not plan for was Bennett Blackwood walking through that door. And what she could not have predicted, not in 1,000 careful rehearsals, was that the woman she had spent 30 years trying to diminish would be the one person in that room he actually respected. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you, someone who shared your blood, your childhood, your name, then you already know what this story costs. Stay with it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your city or country. In the comments, I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Hit that like button too, because what happens next is the kind of thing you won't want to miss. The dress did not fit right across the shoulders. Evelyn Whitmore had known that the moment she put it on in her sister's guest bathroom, tugging at the fabric in the mirror while Vivian stood in the doorway telling her she looked beautiful, that she looked perfect, that any man would be lucky to meet her. Vivian had a way of saying things that sounded like compliments until you replayed them later in your head and noticed the small, sharp edges underneath. Evelyn had not owned a dress like this in years. The emerald green fabric was expensive. She could feel that much, but it belonged to Vivian's world, not hers. Vivian's world had cocktail parties and reserved tables and business-class flights. Evelyn's world had a 7-year-old boy named Jamie who needed new sneakers every 4 months because his feet refused to stop growing. Community health clinic on the west side of Chicago that ran on grants and volunteer hours, and the stubborn belief that people without money still deserved medical care, and a 1-bedroom apartment where she slept on the pull-out couch so Jamie could have the actual bed. She had told Vivian no 3 times before saying yes. The first time, Vivian had called her on a Tuesday evening while Evelyn was filing insurance forms at the clinic. "I know someone," Vivian had said. "A man successful. Serious. You've been alone too long, Evie." Evelyn had said she wasn't interested. She had too much going on. Jamie had a dentist appointment coming up. Clinic's boiler was making a sound nobody could explain. The second time, Vivian had shown up unannounced at Evelyn's apartment with takeout containers and a bottle of wine she knew Evelyn wouldn't drink and a photograph on her phone that she slid across the kitchen counter without asking. "Just look at him," Vivian had said. "Doesn't he seem kind?" Evelyn had glanced at the photograph, a generic headshot, pleasant enough, and handed the phone back. She had said she appreciated the thought, but she wasn't in a place for this. The third time, Vivian had brought their mother into it. She had called Evelyn on a Sunday morning and passed the phone to their mother after 30 seconds, and their mother had said, in the quiet, exhausted way she had said everything for the past decade, "Your sister just wants you to be happy, Evelyn. She worries about you. We all do." And Evelyn had sat there with the phone pressed to her ear and Jamie eating cereal at the kitchen table, and the particular kind of guilt that only family can manufacture settling over her shoulders like wet concrete. She had said yes. She had told herself it was just dinner. One evening. She could survive one evening. She had not told Jamie where she was going exactly. She had said she was meeting someone for dinner, a friend of Aunt Vivian's, and Jamie had looked up from his cereal with his father's dark eyes and said, "Is it a date?" And Evelyn had said, "Maybe. Sort of. Don't make it weird." And Jamie had grinned and said, "I'm not making it weird, Mom. You're making it weird." And she had laughed despite herself and kissed the top of his head and told him Mrs. Garza next door would check on him. The restaurant was called Leonard's. Evelyn had looked it up on her phone while riding the cab over and immediately felt her stomach drop. It was the kind of place that did not list prices on its website. It had a dress code. It had a sommelier. Its photographs showed rooms that glowed amber and warm, populated by people who wore their wealth the way other people wore skin without thinking about it, without effort, as though it had simply always been there. Vivian had texted her, "Table is reserved under my name. They'll take you right back. He's already there, I promise. Don't be nervous, you look amazing." The cab driver had to circle the block twice because Evelyn kept telling him she needed another minute. She finally got out on the second pass. The man at the door had taken her name without expression and led her through the main dining room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had escorted 10,000 people to 10,000 tables and remembered none of them. Evelyn had followed him past tables of people in conversation. People who glanced up for half a second and looked away just as fast. And she had tried to hold her shoulders straight and move like she belonged there, the way Vivian had instructed her. Walk like you own the room, Evie. Don't look at your feet. She had looked at her feet twice. The table was in the center of the room, beneath the largest chandelier, in the most visible spot in the entire restaurant. Evelyn had not known yet that this placement was intentional. She had thought it was simply where the reservation happened to be. She had sat down and placed her small clutch, also borrowed from Vivian, on the table beside her water glass and looked around the room for the man in the photograph. He was not there. She had waited 7 minutes before picking up the menu. She had waited 12 minutes before looking at her phone. Vivian had not responded to her text asking if he was running late. She had waited 17 minutes before the first sound reached her from across the room, a short burst of laughter, quickly suppressed, and then the particular kind of silence that comes when a group of people are working very hard not to look at someone while looking directly at them. Evelyn had turned her head. Vivian was sitting at a table near the back wall with 4 other people. Women Evelyn vaguely recognized from Vivian's social media photographs, women in their early 30s with the polished, effortless appearance of people who had never once worried about a utility bill. One of them had her phone raised, camera pointed in Evelyn's direction. The man in the photograph did not exist. There was no blind date. Evelyn understood everything in the space of about 4 seconds. The dress, the central table, the lighting, the camera. The 17 minutes of waiting, while Vivian and her friends watched from across the room and waited for the humiliation to register on her face so they could capture it. The blood rose into her cheeks, instantly burning. She looked down at the table. She breathed in slowly through her nose. She did not stand up. She did not cry. She did not reach for her phone to pretend she had somewhere else to be. Picked up the menu and continued reading it. The laughter from Vivian's table was harder to suppress now. One of the women said something under her breath, and another one laughed, a high, bright sound that cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like something brittle snapping in half. Evelyn heard the words "poor thing," and then something about her hair, and then Vivian's voice saying, quieter, "Wait for it," like she was expecting something to happen. Evelyn turned a page of the menu. The restaurant had a duck confit that sounded wonderful. She had no intention of ordering it. She was not paying these prices on a clinic worker's salary, but she read the description carefully because it gave her something to look at that was not Vivian's face. She was 30 years old. She had been doing hard things since she was 22 and found out she was pregnant, and the man involved had decided, in his characteristically efficient way, that fatherhood was not something he was built for. She had been doing hard things since she was 23 and delivered Jamie alone in a hospital room with only a night shift nurse she had never met holding her hand. She had been doing hard things since she was 25 and her mother's health had started declining, and the money her parents had saved turned out to be far less than anyone had acknowledged. And Evelyn had picked up extra shifts at the clinic and learned to budget in ways that required a spreadsheet and a kind of mathematical ruthlessness she hadn't known she possessed. She knew what it felt like to be in a room where she did not belong. She had felt it in every hospital administrator's office she had ever sat in. She had felt it in every grant committee meeting, where the people across the table looked at the numbers and looked at her, and looked at the numbers again, as though they could not quite reconcile the two. She had felt it the first time she had walked into Jamie's school for a parent-teacher conference, and every other parent in the hallway seemed to know each other in the easy, unconscious way of people who shared the same zip code and the same tax bracket and the same invisible assumptions about how the world worked. She was not going to fall apart in this restaurant. She was not going to give Vivian that. The doors of the restaurant opened. She noticed it before she saw who it was, because the room changed. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in movies, with heads swiveling and conversation stopping. It was subtler than that. It was the kind of change that happens in the body before it reaches the brain. A collective, almost imperceptible straightening, a slight drop in the volume of conversation, a repositioning of weight. The sommelier, who had been moving toward a table near the window, stopped and turned. 2 men who had been leaning close together in what looked like a private conversation pulled back slightly and placed their hands flat on the table. Evelyn looked toward the door. The man who entered was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive in the way that very understated things look expensive, not because of anything you could point to, but because of everything that was absent. No excess, no performance. He was perhaps late 30s with the kind of face that had been through enough that its stillness read not as calm but as restraint. Dark hair, Cold blue eyes that moved across the room with the systematic efficiency of someone cataloging exits and threats and points of interest all at once, in the time it took most people to blink. He moved through the dining room without stopping. The maitre d' appeared at his elbow for approximately 3 seconds before falling away. He came directly toward Evelyn's table and sat down across from her without asking permission. She stared at him. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not read. "Do you know who I am?" he said. His voice was quiet. Not gentle quiet in the way that rooms are quiet after a loud sound has ended. From Vivian's table, Evelyn could hear movement. The camera phone was probably tracking this exact moment. Honestly, Evelyn said, "I don't think I do." She held his gaze because looking away felt like losing something she couldn't afford to lose. "Should I?" Laughter broke out at Vivian's table, sharp, unkind, feeding on itself. The man across from her did not laugh. He watched Evelyn with the same careful, cataloging attention he had swept across the room when he walked in, except now it was concentrated entirely on her. He was reading her the way she had seen certain clinic patients read paperwork they already suspected contained bad news slowly, missing nothing, preparing for something. "No," he said finally. "You shouldn't have to." He picked up the menu. He did not look toward Vivian's table. He did not acknowledge the laughter. He simply sat there and read the menu as though he had come to this restaurant for dinner and had found someone to have dinner with. And that was the full extent of what was happening. Evelyn looked down at her own menu. Her hands were not shaking, but they wanted to. The next 20 minutes were the strangest of her life. The man who still had not introduced himself ordered for himself without consulting anyone. He asked her if she wanted anything, and she had said, without meaning to say it out loud, "I can't really afford," and then stopped, because that was not information she had planned to share with a stranger. But there it was, sitting on the table between them. He had looked at her for a second, and then said, "Order whatever you want," in a tone that was not generous and not dismissive. It was simply factual, the way he might have said, "The kitchen closes at 10, or your coat is on the floor." She had ordered the duck confit. Vivian and her friends were not subtle. One of them came to the bathroom and walked past Evelyn's table slowly, looking her up and down in a way that was meant to be seen, and said to someone behind her, loud enough to carry, "I genuinely don't understand what she's still doing here." A busboy cleared a glass from a nearby table, and 2 of Vivian's friends erupted in laughter as though he had said something hilarious, using the moment as cover for something Evelyn couldn't quite hear but whose target she understood perfectly. She kept her eyes on her plate. The man across from her, Bennett Blackwood, though she did not yet know his name, watched all of it. He said after a while, "You can leave. I can have a car brought around." "If I leave now," she said, "they win." Something crossed his face. Not surprise exactly. Something more careful than surprise, like the adjustment a person makes when their expectations are revised in a direction they hadn't predicted. "Is that what this is to you?" he said. "A competition?" "No," she said. "It's a matter of principle." He was quiet for a moment. "Expensive principle," he said. "I've had more expensive ones," she said. He almost smiled. She was not certain, because it happened and was gone too quickly to be sure, a slight shift at the corner of his mouth that may or may not have been deliberate. And then the door opened again, and Evelyn turned around, and Jamie was standing at the entrance to the dining room, looking slightly out of breath and very small and scanning the room with the focused, systematic anxiety of a 7-year-old who has decided something is wrong and intends to fix it. He had called Mrs. Garza. Mrs. Garza had apparently not understood that "don't wait up" meant "do not call my son if I'm not home by 8:30. "Mom," Jamie spotted her, and the word came out like a release of pressure, a valve opening. He crossed the dining room in the completely unself-conscious way that children move through spaces without checking whether he belonged there, without calculating the distance between his sneakers and the carpet, without noticing the sommelier's expression or the slight ripple of discomfort his presence sent through the nearest tables. Standing near Bennett was a small girl, 8 years old, dark-haired, wearing a dress that had clearly been chosen by someone other than herself. She was the kind of quiet that goes beyond shyness, the quiet of a child who has learned that the world can hurt without warning and has drawn inward accordingly. She had been standing beside Bennett's chair the entire time, close enough to touch his sleeve, not speaking, not looking at anyone. Jamie noticed her immediately. He stopped beside Evelyn's chair, pressing against her arm the way he did when he was relieved, and trying not to show how relieved he was. And then he looked at the small girl and said, without preamble, "Hi, I'm Jamie. Do you like fish?" The girl stared at him. "I have a fish," Jamie said. "His name is Torpedo. He's not very good at swimming straight, but he tries really hard." Evelyn watched her son. Then she looked at the girl and slowly lowered herself to one knee beside the table, putting herself at eye level, not rushing anything, not asking anything, not making any demands on the child's attention. She picked up a cloth napkin from the table. Her fingers moved without hurrying fold, tuck, press, shape, and then she set a small paper boat into Jamie's glass of water, and they all watched it float. "It knows how to survive storms," Evelyn said, not to the girl directly, just into the air between them. The girl's hand moved forward. One finger touched the edge of the boat. It rocked gently on the water. Something in the girl's face shifted so small and so private that most people in the room would have missed it entirely. The faintest opening, a softness around the eyes that had not been there before. Bennett went completely still. He was looking at his daughter with the expression of a man who has spent years trying to open a lock and has just watched someone else do it without a key. Behind Evelyn, Vivian's table had gone quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people who are satisfied. The tight, airless quiet of people who have miscalculated something important. Bennett stood up slowly. He turned toward Vivian's table. He did not raise his voice. "This ends now." 2 words. Delivered the way you deliver a verdict, not a request. Vivian's friend with the camera phone lowered it. The restaurant seemed to contract slightly around the moment. Everyone finding something else. The sunset, everyone deciding that this particular corner of the evening was no longer somewhere they wanted their attention to be. Vivian's face went through several things very quickly. Prize. Then the familiar arrangement of features she used when she was recalculating, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before she decided what version of herself to perform next. She chose to smile. It was the worst possible choice she could have made. Bennett looked at the smile for exactly 1 second, and then looked away from her entirely, as though she had already been dismissed from a room she was still sitting in. Evelyn rose from the floor. She looked at her son, who was watching all of this with the wide, careful attention of a child who understands more than adults give him credit for. She looked at the small girl, who was still touching the edge of the paper boat. She looked at the man across the table from her, this stranger, with the cold blue eyes and the quiet voice that had emptied the room of laughter in fewer words than it took to order dinner. She did not know his name yet. She did not know what he was, exactly, or what it meant that men who ran legitimate businesses and men who ran other kinds of businesses both went still when he walked into a room. She did not know that the smile Vivian had worn for the last 40 minutes had just become one of the most dangerous mistakes of her life. What Evelyn knew in this moment was the following. She was still in the room. She had not left. She had not cried. She had not given them the footage they came for. And somewhere between the borrowed dress and the paper boat and the duck confit she had not been able to finish, something had shifted in the evening, something she could not name yet, but could feel the way you can feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. The small girl pulled the paper boat carefully from the glass. She held it in both hands. She did not let go of it for the rest of the night. Vivian did not look at her sister when Evelyn walked past her table toward the exit. That was the tell. Vivian looked at everything. She had spent her entire life looking at other people's clothes, other people's companions, other people's portions at dinner, calculating distance and deficiency, the automatic precision of someone who had learned early that comparison was the only currency that reliably paid out. But when Evelyn moved past the table with Jamie's hand in hers and the small dark-haired girl trailing 2 steps behind them, Vivian looked at the centerpiece, a vase of white flowers. She looked at it with the focused intensity of someone who needed an object to anchor them while their internal architecture made emergency repairs. One of her friends, Darcy, the one who had held the camera phone, leaned in and said something low. Vivian shook her head once. Short, final. The conversation was over before it started. Outside, the October air hit Evelyn across the face like something she had not known she needed. She stopped on the sidewalk. Jamie pressed against her side. He was quiet now, the easy, instinctive quiet of a child who has read the room correctly and understands that the moment calls for proximity rather than speech. He leaned his head against her arm, and she let him, standing there on the pavement outside a restaurant she never should have entered, in a borrowed dress that did not fit right across the shoulders, breathing. She heard the door open behind her. Bennett stepped out. He had his daughter with him, one large hand resting on the girl's shoulder, not gripping, not steering, just present, the way you keep your hand near something you cannot afford to lose. He spoke briefly to a man near the curb, who had materialized from somewhere without appearing to come from anywhere specific, said 3 words Evelyn could not hear, and the man moved away into the dark. "Rosalie," Bennett said. The girl looked up at him. "Car is coming." Rosalie nodded. She was still holding the paper boat. She had transferred it from both hands to one, pressed carefully against her palm. the way children hold things they have decided matter. Bennett looked at Evelyn. The amber light from the restaurant windows reached them unevenly out here, catching the side of his face and leaving the rest in shadow. In this light, with the performance of the restaurant stripped away, he looked older than he had inside. Not in a diminished way, in the way that certain faces look more honest when the stage lighting is gone. "Do you have a car coming?" he said. "I'll call a cab," she said. Pause. Brief enough that most people would not have registered it as anything. "I'll have someone take you. I don't need slate," he said.
You have the boy?
Evelyn looked at him. She was trying to locate the mechanism behind the offer, the angle, the implication, the thing he wanted in return for the gesture. She had learned over years and from necessity that offers from powerful people always had architecture you couldn't see from the front. You had to walk around them. She could not find it. "Fine," she said. The car was black and large and arrived in under 2 minutes, which told her several things about the kind of arrangements Bennett Blackwood maintained on a routine basis. The driver did not speak. He opened the rear door and held it without making eye contact with anyone. Jamie got in first, Evelyn followed. Bennett stood by the car door. Rosalie was beside him, looking at Jamie through the window with an expression that was not quite curiosity and not quite longing, something between the two, something that had not had enough time to figure out what it was yet. "She's been like this for 8 months, Bennett said. Evelyn looked at him. "She doesn't talk to people," he said. "Not strangers. Not most people she knows." He said it without asking for anything in return for saying it, no request for sympathy, no bid for explanation. He just said it, the way you state a fact you have been living inside long enough that you no longer remember what it felt like not to know it. "The boat helped," Evelyn said. "Yes," he said it did. He closed the car door. She watched him through the window as the car pulled away, standing on the pavement with his daughter, the restaurant light catching his back, not watching the car leave but looking down at Rosalie, who was looking at the paper boat in her hand with the concentration of someone trying to understand something they don't have the words for yet. The cab ride home took 22 minutes. Jamie fell asleep against her shoulder at the 11-minute mark, his breath evening out into that deep, unworried rhythm that children achieve so effortlessly and that adults spend years trying to get back. Evelyn sat in the dark of the moving car and looked out the window at the city moving past her and tried to figure out what had just happened. She could not figure out what had just happened. She took the borrowed dress off as soon as she got Jamie to bed and hung it on the back of the closet door where she would not have to look at it, and changed into the clothes she wore when she worked late, soft pants, an old clinic sweatshirt with a faded logo on the chest. She made tea she did not drink. She sat at the kitchen table with the mug between her hands and thought about Vivian's face when Bennett's voice had cut across the room. She thought about it not with satisfaction, but with something that sat in the stomach more heavily than satisfaction, something that felt like the beginning of a problem she did not yet have the shape of. She texted Vivian at 11:14, "What was tonight?" Vivian did not respond. She tried again at 11:40. "Vivian, answer me." Nothing. She put the phone face down on the table and went to check on Jamie. He was sleeping with one arm thrown across Torpedo's tank, the nightlight casting a faint orange glow across the side of his face. The fish moved in slow, slightly tilted circles. It really was not a competent swimmer. But it tried, as Jamie had said, very hard. She stood in the doorway of her son's room and breathed. She had survived tonight. She had not broken. She had not given them what they wanted. She told herself that was enough. It was not, as it turned out, enough, but she would not know that for another 4 days. The call came on a Wednesday. Evelyn was at the clinic in the back office, working through the quarterly report that the grant committee needed by Friday. Dr. Hennessy, who ran the clinic and had hired Evelyn 6 years ago on the basis of an application letter, she had stayed up until 2 in the morning rewriting 7 times, knocked twice, and opened the door. He did not look like himself. Dr. Hennessy was 61 years old and had spent 30 of those years treating patients in neighborhoods that better-funded institutions had systematically declined to serve. He had a particular expression for difficult news, calm, careful, the face of someone who has delivered bad diagnoses, often enough that he has learned to remove his own feelings from the room first and retrieve them afterward. He wore that expression now. "There are 2 men outside," he said. "They have identification. They want to speak with you." Evelyn put down her pen. "What kind of identification?" "Federal." She walked out to the waiting area. The 2 men were in their mid-40s, dressed in the generic professional plainness of people who wanted to be taken seriously without being remembered. They showed her credentials and said their names, and she processed neither because the word federal was still moving through her system, bouncing off surfaces. "Ms. Whitmore," the taller one said. We'd like to speak with you privately if that's possible. They used the conference room. It was a small room with a folding table and 4 chairs and a window that looked into the hallway. Evelyn sat on one side, the 2 men sat on the other. The taller one opened a folder. Are you familiar with a financial operation registered under the name Harlow Transit Solutions? No, she said. Have you ever had contact with anyone associated with that company? No. Have you ever received funds from any account associated with Harlow Transit Solutions or any of its registered subsidiaries? She looked at him steadily. No. What is this about? He turned the folder around. There were documents inside. Count records. Transaction histories. Her name appeared in several places as a recipient, as a point of contact, as someone listed in correspondence she had never written. Her name, her address, her signature, or something that looked enough like her signature that her stomach clenched looking at it. This is wrong, she said. These are wrong. I've never seen these documents. I've never been in contact with whatever this company is. Ms. Whitmore, we're not here to make accusations, the shorter one said in the careful tone of someone who is absolutely here to make accusations. We're gathering information. We'd appreciate your cooperation. I am cooperating, she said. I'm telling you the truth. Whatever these documents show, it's not accurate. Someone has made a mistake, or someone has fabricated this. The taller one wrote something down. We may need you to come in for a formal interview, he said. We'll be in touch. They left her the folder. She sat alone in the conference room for 6 minutes after they walked out, looking at her own name on documents she had never touched, and felt the particular cold that comes not from temperature, but from understanding that something has been done to you that you cannot yet see the full shape of. She called Vivian from the parking lot. Vivian answered on the 4th ring. Evelyn, she said, with the practiced warmth of someone who has had 4 rings to prepare. I was just thinking about you, about the other night. What did you do? Evelyn said. Not a question. A statement with a question mark behind it, barely. I don't know what you mean. Federal investigators just came to my clinic, Vivian. Silence, not the silence of someone who is surprised. The silence of someone who is deciding how to respond to something they already knew was coming. That doesn't have anything to do with me, Vivian said. My name is on financial records I've never seen. My signature is on documents I've never signed. And 4 days ago you had me sitting in a restaurant as a setup. Evelyn's voice was completely level. She had made it level deliberately, the way you make something level by pressing very hard on the surface. I'm going to ask you one more time, Evelyn. Vivian's voice shifted softer now, almost gentle, which was how Evelyn knew she was moving into a different kind of performance. I set up a dinner. It was supposed to be funny. I didn't think it would go the way it did, with him sitting down and... Who put my name on those documents, Vivian? I don't know anything about any documents. Vivian, I genuinely don't know what you're talking about. Evelyn ended the call. She stood in the parking lot with her phone in her hand and the October wind moving through the space between her jacket collar and her neck, and thought about the sister she had defended for 30 years. The sister she had covered for when they were teenagers. The sister she had lent money to twice in their 20s. Money Vivian had returned in one case and quietly never mentioned again in the other. The sister who had driven her to the hospital the night Jamie was born and stayed for 40 minutes before deciding she needed to be somewhere else. She thought about the camera phone. She thought about the way Vivian had looked at the centerpiece. She went back inside and finished the quarterly report because Dr. Hennessy needed it by Friday, and the grant committee did not care about her life. Bennett Blackwood found out about the federal inquiry on the same day it happened, through channels that were faster and more thorough than anything a government agency typically managed. He was in a meeting on the 14th floor of a building he owned outright, listening to a man named Garrett explain the quarterly figures for 3 legitimate businesses that served as the structural skeleton around which his actual operations were arranged. He was listening with the part of his attention that handled numbers while the other part handled everything else, which was a skill he had developed over many years and considered one of his more useful ones. His phone buzzed. He looked at the message. He held it for longer than messages typically held him. "Give me the room," he said. Garrett stopped mid-sentence. Everyone in the room moved toward the door with the practiced, unquestioning efficiency of people who understood that when Bennett said, "Give me the room," it was not the beginning of a negotiation. He sat alone at the head of the table and read the message again. Evelyn Whitmore, Federal in Harlow Transit. He knew what Harlow Transit was. He knew everything about Harlow Transit, because Harlow Transit moved money through 3 different holding structures that were adjacent to operations he had built and maintained and protected for 11 years. He knew every individual who had ever been connected to it, every account it had ever touched, every transaction that bore its name. Evelyn Whitmore's name should not have been anywhere near it. He called the man who had sent him the message. "Walk me through it," he said. He listened for 8 minutes without speaking. He asked 2 questions. Then he said he would call back, and he set the phone down on the table and looked out the window at the city 14 floors below him. The evidence was clean. That was the problem. It was the kind of clean that only happened when someone had constructed it carefully, with patience and access and an understanding of how the documentation needed to look in order to be believed. Evelyn's name appeared in the right places. Her signature was on the right documents. There were transaction records that traced back to an account she apparently held, an account that, if you did not know to look for its manufactured origin, appeared genuine. Someone had built this. Someone had spent real time and real resources building this. And whoever had done it had access to information about Harlow Transit that they should not have possessed unless they were inside his organization. Bennett sat with that for a long time. He was not a man who made emotional decisions. He had survived long enough in the world he moved through by understanding that sentiment was a liability, that caring about outcomes you could not control was a form of weakness that the wrong people would find eventually and exploit. He had built his life on clear sight, evidence, pattern recognition. The pattern here told him Evelyn had been framed. But he had not survived this long by assuming his own pattern recognition was infallible. He needed to see her. He sent a message to a woman named Clara, who handled the kind of communications that did not go through phones or emails, and told her to reach Evelyn Whitmore directly. The meeting happened 2 nights later at a building Bennett used for private conversations, a floor above a restaurant he owned in the River North Eastwood, accessible by an elevator that did not appear on any building directory. The space was plain by his standards, a table, chairs, a window that looked west toward the lake. He had not made it comfortable because he was not trying to make her comfortable. He was trying to understand something. Evelyn arrived 8 minutes late, which he noted without judgment. She had taken a cab, not a car he had offered, and she had declined, which also told him something. She was wearing her own clothes this time. Dark jeans, a jacket that had seen better winters. No borrowed armor. She sat across from him. She looked at him with the same steadiness she had shown in the restaurant, that composure. That was not the composure of someone who was unafraid, but the composure of someone who had decided that fear was not going to determine what they did next. "You know about the inquiry," she said. "Yes. Then you know why I'm here." "Tell me anyway," he said. "In your own words." Something moved across her face. Not anger, exactly the thing that comes before anger, the heat that precedes the fire. "I'm here," she said, "because my name is on documents I've never touched, connected to an operation I've never heard of. And the only connection I can identify between my ordinary, completely legal life and anything that would interest federal investigators is that a week ago I sat across a table from you. You think I did this? I think someone did this," she said. "And I think you're more likely to know who than anyone else I could sit across from." He studied her. "What do you know about Harlow Transit Solutions?" he said. "Nothing. What do you know about me?" "Enough," she said. "Chicago is a small city when you know which questions to ask." He leaned back slightly. "Then you know what I'm capable of." "Yes," she said, "which is why I'm sitting here asking you directly instead of assuming." The silence between them was not empty. It was full of the things neither of them had said yet, full of the question he was building toward and the answer she was bracing for. "The evidence against you is constructed," he said. "Someone made it, someone with access to financial architecture that is not public knowledge." He paused. "Someone inside my organization," she absorbed this. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that I'm being used as a target by someone who works for you." "That's what the evidence suggests," he said. "I don't yet know who. And while you're figuring that out," she said, "I'm the one with my name on federal documents." "Yes," she looked at him for a long moment. "That's not good enough," she said. "No," he said, "isn't. I need this gone. I need my name off whatever this is. I have a son. I have a clinic. I have patients who depend on me being employed and credentialed and not under federal investigation. I understand that, do you? It was not a question." He met her eyes. "I'm going to find who did this," he said. "And I'm going to fix it. How long? I don't know yet." "That's also not good enough." "I know," he said, "but it's the truth." She stood up. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and held it without putting it on, standing in the plain room, with the city lights low and distant through the window behind her. "I won't stay in rooms where I'm being managed," she said. "If you find something, you tell me. Directly. Not through someone else's message. Not in pieces, directly." "Agreed," he said. She put her jacket on. "My son can't know about any of this," she said, "whatever it is. However it goes." "Agreed," he said again. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back, And for a moment, the city light from the window was behind her, and he could not read her face clearly. "The girl," Evelyn said, "Rosalie, how is she?" The question landed differently than he expected. He had expected her to leave angry, and she was angry. He could see it in the set of her jaw, in the controlled rhythm of her breathing. But she had stopped to ask about his daughter. "She slept with the boat," he said. Pause. "Good," Evelyn said. She left. Bennett sat alone in the room for a long time after the sound of the elevator faded. He pulled out the folder his people had assembled, the full documentation of what had been planted, every thread they had so far traced. He went through it page by page, the account records, the signature comparisons, the timestamps. He had been through it 3 times already. On the 4th pass, something snagged his attention. Timestamp on one of the transaction records. He had noted it before without it meaning anything. Now, with the context of what he had just said to Evelyn, someone with access to financial architecture that is not public knowledge, the timestamp pulled at him differently. The transaction had been recorded at 11:07 p.m. on a Saturday. He knew which Saturday. He had been at a private dinner that Saturday, a dinner attended by 11 people, all of them inside his organization. It was the only occasion on which certain specific details about Harlow Transit had been discussed openly, in the assumption that the room was sealed. 11 people. He wrote the names down from memory. He looked at the list. He thought about who among those 11 would have had the additional access, needed the technical access, not just the knowledge. Who would have been able to convert the information from that dinner into documentation precise enough to survive federal scrutiny. He crossed off 4 names immediately, not because he trusted them, but because they lacked the specific capability. He was left with 7. He stared at the list. Then his phone buzzed again, Clara this time, with a short message that contained 2 sentences. He read it twice. The second name from the bottom of his list of 7 had just booked a flight. One way, departing in 6 hours. Bennett stood up. Whatever had been a private investigation became something else. In that moment, something with a clock attached to it, something with edges sharp enough to cut whoever got close, and Evelyn Whitmore's name was still on every document, still inside every file, still sitting in a federal record like a splinter buried too deep to see but deep enough to fester. And the person responsible was currently packing a bag in an apartment on the north side of the city with the specific efficiency of someone who believed they had already won. The man's name was Dario Vess. He had worked for Bennett for 9 years, which in Bennett's world was long enough to be trusted and long enough to know exactly which trust to violate for maximum damage. He handled financial architecture, the layering, the structuring, the movement of money through systems that were designed to look like one thing while being another. He was good at it. He was, in fact, exceptional at it, which was the reason Bennett had kept him close, and the reason Dario had understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent 9 years watching a man operate, exactly what kind of access he possessed and what it was worth to the right buyer. The apartment was on the north side, a building that looked like 6 other buildings on the same block brick face, narrow windows, a door that required a key fob. Bennett arrived with 2 men, Marcus and a person everyone called Shep, whose actual name nobody used anymore, and they took the stairwell rather than the elevator because elevators were boxes and boxes were traps. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Bennett knocked, not the knock of someone who was uncertain about what they would find on the other side. The knock of someone who has already decided how the next 10 minutes will go and is simply initiating the sequence. 30 seconds of silence. Then the sound of movement inside. Not the unhurried movement of someone who had been asleep, but the particular quality of movement that happens when a person is deciding very quickly between 2 or 3 options, and their body is already cycling through the physical requirements of each. Bennett stepped to the side of the door. Shep positioned himself against the opposite wall. The door opened 6 inches on a chain. Dario Vess looked through the gap. He was 43 years old, medium build, the kind of face that had always looked slightly unfinished features that worked individually, but didn't quite resolve into a coherent whole. He was dressed not in pajamas, bag visible on the floor behind him, half-zipped. He had been 20 minutes from gone. His eyes moved from Bennett to the space where Marcus was standing, and then back to Bennett. His face did the thing faces do when a person's internal calculation completes, and the answer is bad. "Bennett," he said, "careful, calibrated, it's late." "Open the door, Dario." "I was about to head out, actually." "I have opened the door." The chain came off. Bennett walked in first. He did not look around the apartment, the way someone entering an unfamiliar space looks around. He moved directly to the center of the room and turned, which put his back to nothing and his sight lines to everything. The apartment smelled like takeout containers and the synthetic freshness of a plug-in air thing that was losing the argument with everything else. The bag on the floor was a rolling carry-on, dark blue, the kind designed to fit in an overhead compartment. Dario stood near the kitchen counter with about 6 feet of space between himself and the nearest exit, and both exits covered by people who were larger than him and had been doing this specific kind of work for longer than he had been doing anything. "You know why I'm here," Bennett said. "I honestly don't," Dario said. And the word honestly was a mistake, the kind of word people reach for when they're trying to sound honest, which is different from being honest. And Bennett had spent enough time with liars to know the difference the way a musician knows a flat note. "Harlow Transit," Bennett said. "Evelyn Whitmore's name. The Saturday dinner in November." Dario's jaw did something small, tightening. "There and gone. I don't know what you're—" "Don't," Bennett said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the word you use when you have already completed the argument and are simply declining to have it again. Dario stopped. The silence in the apartment was the kind that has texture. You could feel it against your skin, pressing. "Who approached you?" Bennett said. "Nothing, Dario. I know what you did. I have the timestamp from the Saturday dinner. I have the account construction trail. I have the access log from the Harlow system that shows your credentials used at 11:47 on a night you told me you were in Milwaukee." Bennett paused. "I'm not here to debate whether you did it. I'm here to find out who you did it for." Dario looked at the bag on the floor. It was a brief look, involuntary, the kind of look that reveals what the mind is still processing as an option, even when the body already knows the option is closed. "There's nowhere to go," Bennett said. Not cruelly, just factually. Dario sat down on the arm of the couch. He put his hands on his knees. His shoulders dropped by about half an inch, the specific surrender of someone whose body has made the decision before their voice catches up. "She came to me," said Bennett. "Waited. 6 weeks ago. She said she had a problem, and she needed someone who understood how money moves and how names get attached to things." Dario looked at the middle distance, not at Bennett. "She said it was personal, that it wouldn't touch the organization, that it was contained." "Who?" Bennett said. Dario looked up. "Vivian Whitmore," he said. The name sat in the room. Bennett's expression did not change. That was the discipline, 38 years of learning to receive information without letting the reception show. Because the moment your face tells people what the information cost you, you have handed them something they can use. Inside, the thing that shifted was not surprise. It was something colder than surprise. Was the particular feeling of a pattern, completing all the disconnected pieces, arranging themselves in the half-second, after you understand the shape they were always building toward. "How did she reach you?" he said. "Through a woman named Petra. I'd done some work, separate work, nothing connected to you for a real estate firm Petra ran. Vivian knew Petra." He rubbed one hand across his face. "She had money. She knew what she wanted. She had already done the research on what Evelyn's name connected to. She knew about the restaurant. She knew you'd sat across from her sister. She said she needed the association to look real before investigators went looking. She knew about Harlow Transit. She knew the name. Not the structure. I gave her the structure." Bennett was quiet. "She said it was about getting her sister out of the picture." Dario said. "That her sister had stumbled into something into your attention, and that there were people who needed that undone." He paused. "She made it sound like she was doing you a favor." "She made it sound," Bennett said, "like she was acting on my behalf." Dario said nothing, which was its own answer. Bennett stood there for a moment with that information. Vivian had not simply acted out of jealousy or cruelty, though those were clearly present. She had constructed the frame specifically to read as something Bennett's organization would want to look from the outside, like an authorized removal of an inconvenient variable, which meant that if the federal inquiry had gone further, and if someone had started pulling threads, the trail would have eventually led not just to Evelyn, but back toward Bennett's own operations, contaminating both of them simultaneously. It was not a stupid plan. It was, in fact, a plan that demonstrated a specific kind of intelligence, not the intelligence of someone who understood Bennett's world from the inside, but the intelligence of someone who had observed it long enough to understand how it looked from the outside, and had used that observation as a weapon. "Where was she getting the money?" Bennett said. "Her accounts. Personal. She liquidated something, I don't know what. She had enough. And the investigators. Did she make contact with them directly, or did it surface through normal channels? She sent the documents anonymously, timed it so they'd arrive while the account history was still fresh." Bennett looked at Marcus. Marcus wrote something in a small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. He had been keeping notes in that notebook for 11 years, and his handwriting had never improved. But it was always accurate. You were going to run, Bennett said to Dario. Yes. To where? Dario told him. Bennett listened. Then he told Dario what was going to happen next, which was not running, and Dario listened in the way that people listen when all the alternatives have been removed from the room. They left the apartment 20 minutes after they had arrived. In the car, Bennett called Clara and gave her 3 instructions. The first concerned Dario. The second concerned the federal inquiry. The third concerned Vivian Whitmore. Then he put the phone down and looked out the window at the city, moving past at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, all those lit windows, all those lives happening behind glass. And somewhere in one of those lit windows, a woman was sleeping, or not sleeping, with no idea that the architecture of her destruction had just been disassembled in an apartment on the north side by the man she had tried to use it against. He thought about calling Evelyn. He looked at his phone for a long moment. He put it back in his pocket. She deserved to hear it in person. She deserved to hear it completely, not in pieces over a phone call at 11 at night, while she was managing her son in her clinic, and the ordinary weight of a life that had just had something extraordinary and ugly dropped into its middle. He would tell her in the morning. He did not tell her in the morning, because the morning brought something he had not anticipated, which was a second layer to Vivian's plan, the layer that demonstrated Vivian was not as unsophisticated as he had begun to assume. His lawyer called it 742. There's a problem, his lawyer said. His lawyer's name was Edmund Farr, and he had been practicing law for 31 years and had the kind of voice that delivered bad news with the same tone he delivered good news, which was a professional asset and a personally unnerving quality. The federal inquiry into Whitmore has been escalated. Someone made a second submission, additional documentation, came in overnight. Bennett was in the kitchen. Rosalie was at the table eating cereal. He moved into the hallway. What documentation, he said, keeping his voice low and level. Transaction records that connect the Whitmore account directly to a Blackwood-adjacent holding company. Not Harlow. Something else. Edmund paused. Bennett, if this documentation is accepted as genuine, it stops being an inquiry into Whitmore and becomes an inquiry into your organization with Whitmore as the entry point. Bennett stood in the hallway of his own house at 7:42 in the morning and understood that Vivian had not made one plan. She had made 2. The second one was insurance, a delayed submission. Time to go out automatically if certain conditions were not met, set in motion before Dario had even finished the first round of documents. She had anticipated the possibility of discovery. She had built a contingency. He was not dealing with jealousy dressed up as strategy. He was dealing with strategy. How long, he said. Before it becomes formal? Days, maybe less if they move quickly. He went back to the kitchen. Rosalie looked up at him from her cereal bowl. She had her mother's eyes, which was a thing he could not look at directly most mornings, and this morning was no different. He sat across from her and watched her eat for a moment, and thought about what it would mean for her if the inquiry expanded the exposure, the scrutiny, the particular cruelty of having your father's life examined in public by people with subpoenas. You're making the face, Rosalie said. He looked at her. The one where you're thinking hard about something you don't want to think about, she said. She had started speaking more in the 2 weeks, since the restaurant not fluently, not easily, but in the tentative, trial-by-trial way of someone testing whether the words would hold her weight. I'm fine, he said. You're not, she said. But that's okay. She went back to her cereal. He looked at his daughter for a moment longer than he should have if he wanted to maintain the composure he was working to maintain. Then he called Evelyn. She picked up on the second ring. I need to see you, he said. Today now, if you can manage it. A short pause. What happened, she said. Not a question. I'll tell you when I see you, Bennett. Her voice was careful, controlled in the way that his was controlled, the way of someone who has learned to manage what their voice reveals. Is it worse? He did not answer immediately, which was itself an answer. Yes, he said. She met him at the building in River North at 9:15. She had gotten someone to cover her morning at the clinic, which told him she understood the weight of the call without needing it spelled out. Came in wearing her coat, not removing it, sitting across from him, with her hands folded on the table and her expression arranged in the way she arranged it when she was preparing to receive something difficult present, attentive. The particular stillness of someone who has received difficult things before and knows that flinching doesn't change the content. He told her about Dario. He told her about Vivian. He told her about the second submission. He watched her face as he spoke. Not to gauge weakness, to understand what she was doing with the information, which was something different. She took it in without interruption. Her breathing changed twice, once when he said Vivian's name in connection with Dario, and once when he explained the second submission. Both times she brought it back under control within 3 or 4 seconds. Both times he watched the effort that cost her and said nothing about it. When he finished, she was quiet. She built a backup, Evelyn said. She planned for the possibility that it would fall apart. Yes. Evelyn looked at the table between them. My sister planned for every contingency except the one where I didn't give her a reaction in that restaurant. She said it quietly, almost to herself. If I'd cried, if I'd walked out, if I'd done any of the things she expected me to do, I wouldn't have been interesting enough for you to sit down. Probably not, he said. She did all of this, Evelyn said, because I didn't break. The way she said it was not pride. It was something much more complicated than pride, something that had grief in it and exhaustion, and the specific disorientation of understanding that the punishment you are receiving is a consequence of your own refusal to be diminished. I need to ask you something, Bennett said. She looked up. When investigators contact you again, and they will, given the new submission, I need to know that you won't try to handle it independently, that you won't go to Vivian, that you won't make any move without telling me first. Something moved across her face. You're asking me to trust you, she said. After telling me that someone in your organization built the trap that caught me. Yes, he said. I know how that sounds. It sounds, she said, like you're asking me to stand still while people connected to you finish deciding what to do with me. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to give me 72 hours, he said. I'm asking you to let me fix what my organization broke. And if you can't fix it in 72 hours, then you go to whoever you decide to go to and you tell them everything, including my name, and I'll deal with the consequences of that separately. She stared at him. You'd accept that, she said. Me giving your name to federal investigators. If I can't protect you in 72 hours, he said, then I don't deserve the 72 hours. And you shouldn't take the fall for something that started in my house. The silence between them was long enough that he could hear the building around them, the low mechanical breath of ventilation, the distant movement of the elevator somewhere below. 72 hours, she said. Yes, I want to be in the room, she said. When you confront Vivian, I want to be there. He had not expected that. He considered it. That's not non-negotiable, she said. She did this to me, not to your organization, to me specifically. I want to be in the room. He looked at her for a long moment. She stood. She picked up her jacket, which she had not taken off, and moved toward the door, and then stopped and turned back in the way she had done before at the door, with the city behind her, in the posture of someone who has decided to say one more thing. Did she know? Evelyn said. Vivian. Did she know what would happen to her if you found out she had done this? She knew enough, he said, and she did it anyway. Yes, Evelyn absorbed that. She hates me more than she's afraid of you, she said. I don't know if that makes her brave or just stupid. She left. Bennett sat alone and thought about that for a long time. He had been feared by many people over many years. It was a professional constant, the baseline condition of his existence, something he had learned to neither enjoy nor apologize for. People did not do what Vivian had done when they were afraid. They did it when their hatred was large enough to make them feel temporarily invincible. It was not courage, it was obsession. And obsession was dangerous in a specific way. It was not rational, which meant it did not respond to the normal mechanisms of deterrence that rational things responded to. He spent the next 18 hours working, not sleeping, working. His team pulled everything, every financial record connected to Vivian Whitmore's personal accounts for the past 8 months. Every communication between Vivian and Petra, every connection between Petra and Dario, every piece of the documentary architecture that Vivian had constructed, and the precise sequence in which it had been constructed. They found the second submission's origin point, a scheduled send from an account Vivian had created under a variation of Petra's company name. They found the mechanism by which it had been timed. They began the process of demonstrating to the people who needed to be demonstrated to that the documentation was fabricated. Marcus found something at the 14-hour mark that nobody had been looking for. He came into the room where Bennett was working and placed a single printed page on the table without saying anything. Bennett looked at it. It was a property transfer record, 8 months old, a property in Vivian Whitmore's name, transferred to an LLC that traced back through 2 holding layers to a man named Robert Kane. Bennett knew Robert Kane. Robert Kane was not in his organization. Robert Kane was adjacent to a competing organization, a smaller operation, territorial in a way that created low-level friction every 18 months or so, never enough to become a formal conflict, but enough to be monitored. Robert Kane had, 3 years ago, attempted to negotiate access to certain routes that Bennett controlled, and had been declined in terms that left no ambiguity. He looked at the property transfer record for a long time. Vivian had not simply acted from personal hatred. though personal hatred was present and real. She had also been doing business. The property transfer was payment, not the only payment probably, but a significant one. She had sold her access, her knowledge of her sister's connection to Bennett, to someone who had a separate and much larger reason to want damage done to Bennett's organization. Plan was not Vivian's alone. The plan had been designed, and Vivian had been recruited to implement the personal layer of it because she was the only person who could have done it convincingly, the only person with a genuine connection to Evelyn, genuine enough to make the frame look organic rather than constructed. Bennett sat back in his chair. He thought about Evelyn sitting in the restaurant in the borrowed dress. He thought about Vivian watching from across the room with her camera phone. He thought about how long ago the design of this had begun, weeks before the restaurant, before the fake blind date, before any of it. The restaurant had not been Vivian's idea. The restaurant had been the beginning of the execution of someone else's idea. A place to establish the public association between Evelyn and Bennett. A moment that could be referenced, documented, witnessed. Evelyn had been placed in front of him deliberately. Not by Vivian, by Kane. Vivian had simply been the instrument. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood there looking at the city with the specific feeling of a man who has just understood that the game he thought he was playing was a smaller game inside a larger one, and that several of his moves had already been anticipated and accounted for by someone sitting outside the board. He called Marcus back into the room. "Find Kane," he said. "Tonight, I want to know where he is, who he's with, and what he thinks is happening right now." Marcus left. Bennett stood at the window and thought about Evelyn, about the 72 hours he had promised her, about the room she had demanded to be in, about the way she had said, "She hates me more than she's afraid of you," with that complicated thing in her voice that was not pride. She did not know about Kane yet. She did not know that her sister had been a recruited instrument in something that extended past personal hatred into territory that was much more dangerous. That the 72 hours he had promised her were already under pressure from a direction neither of them had known to account for, and that the person most at risk in the next 48 hours was not the one who had done the framing, but the one who had been framed. Because she was the thread that, if Kane understood how close Bennett was getting, could be pulled to create a crisis that would force Bennett's hand before he was ready. His phone rang. "Clara," he answered. "She's gone," Clara said. "Vivian Whitmore. She left her apartment 2 hours ago, and she's not at any of her usual locations." Bennett's hand tightened on the phone. "Is she running?" he said. "I don't know," Clara said. "But she took a bag." He stood at the window with that information settling over him like weather, the particular cold of understanding that the clock he had been working against had just changed its speed, that somewhere in this city, a woman who knew exactly how much damage she had done was moving toward a place where she calculated she would be safe, and that the only reason she would be moving now, at this hour in this way, was that someone had told her. Someone had told Vivian that Dario had talked, which meant someone had told Kane, which meant Kane already knew that Bennett had the shape of the plan. And if Kane knew Bennett had the shape of the plan, then Evelyn Whitmore was no longer just a frame. She was leverage. Bennett moved in the 7 seconds after Clara's call ended. Not fast, deliberate. Fast and deliberate are different things, and the difference matters most when the margin for error has just collapsed to nothing. He crossed the room, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, and was already talking by the time he reached the door. "Marcus." "Shep now." Marcus appeared from the hallway. He read Bennett's face and pocketed the notebook without being asked. "Kane knows," Bennett said, "which means Vivian is running and Evelyn is exposed. We split. You go to Kane's last confirmed location, the warehouse on Fulton. He uses it for the cold storage operation. I go to Evelyn. You should take someone with you," Marcus said. "I'm taking you." Shep goes to Fulton. They were in the car in under 2 minutes. The city at this hour was half empty, and the car moved through it, the way water moves through a structure that has gaps, finding the open spaces, the unblocked routes, the places where the pressure wasn't. Bennett sat in the passenger seat with his phone working both hands. One call to Edmund, his lawyer, with instructions about the federal documentation that needed to be in motion by morning regardless of what happened tonight. One message to Clara to put 2 people outside Evelyn's building immediately, before he arrived. One call to a man named Tully, who handled situations that required speed more than precision. Then he called Evelyn. It rang 4 times, 5. His jaw tightened by a fraction. "Hello." Her voice was the voice of someone who had been asleep, not deeply, but in the surface way of a person whose body has given up and dragged the mind with it despite everything. Groggy, and then, within 2 seconds, not groggy alert in the way she went alert, which was immediate and total. "Get up," he said. "Get Jamie up. Don't turn on lights." Go to the back of your apartment and stay away from the windows. A short silence, 1 second. Okay, she said, no questions. No, what is happening? No, are you serious? Just the word and the sound of movement beginning. I'm 12 minutes away, he said. My people are outside your building right now. Don't open the door until I call you. Understood. She ended the call. He looked at his phone for a second. After the line went dead at the blank screen, the abrupt silence. He had told a lot of people to do a lot of things under pressure, and most of them had given him at least 2 seconds of hesitation, of processing, of the small friction that fear creates between instruction and action. Evelyn had given him nothing but compliance and the sound of her feet hitting the floor. He filed that away in the part of his mind where he kept things that mattered. 11 minutes later, the car stopped outside her building. Clara's people were there, 2 figures positioned at the building entrance, in the way that people who do this for a living position themselves, visible enough to be a deterrent, angled to see approaches from 3 directions. One of them made a small movement when Bennett's car arrived. Nothing had come to the door. Nothing had moved in the alley alongside the building. The street was quiet in the way that streets in this neighborhood were quiet at this hour, which was genuinely quiet, not the false quiet that precedes something. Bennett went up the stairs rather than the elevator. 3rd floor. He knocked twice, paused, knocked once, the pattern he had told Clara to relay. The door opened. Evelyn was dressed. Not dressed like she had taken time to think about it. Dressed like she had pulled on the nearest available clothes in the dark, while simultaneously waking a 7-year-old and keeping her voice at a register that would not cause panic. Dark pants, the clinic sweatshirt, hair pulled back in a way that was functional rather than intentional. She had her phone in one hand and a look on her face that was the closest thing to fear he had seen from her. Except it was not quite fear, it was the concentrated, weaponized attention of someone who has decided that fear is information and they are currently using it. Jamie was behind her, sitting on the couch in the posture of a child who has been told something serious is happening and is working very hard to demonstrate that he can handle it. He was wearing a hoodie over what appeared to be pajama pants, and he had the fish tank's small nightlight turned toward him, which created a faint orange glow around him in the otherwise dark room. He was looking at Bennett with the eyes of a child who recognizes that the adults around him are in a state that requires something from him, and who has not yet decided what that something is. Hey, Jamie said to Bennett. Hey, Bennett said back. Is my mom in trouble? We're handling it, Bennett said. Jamie looked at him for a second, with the evaluating intelligence of a child who has learned not to accept adult reassurance at face value, but who also understands when pressing will not produce better information. Okay, Jamie said. Evelyn moved to the kitchen, keeping her voice low. Tell me, Bennett told her about Kane, about the property transfer, about the recruited instrument and the larger game. He told her efficiently, without preamble, because she did not need preamble and there was no time for it. He watched her absorb the information, saw the moment it landed, the very specific moment when she understood that the thing she had believed was a personal betrayal by her sister was also something else. Something larger and colder and less personal, which in some ways was worse because personal betrayal at least has a human face. She was being used, Evelyn said, yes, and she chose to be used. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, she said. They're not. She looked at the counter, at the mug she had made tea in earlier, and not finished. Where is she now? We don't know yet. And Kane. We're locating him. What does he want? She said. Ultimately, what does this get him if it works? Pressure on my organization, Bennett said. A federal investigation with my name adjacent to it creates leverage. He can use that leverage to renegotiate the routes I declined him 3 years ago, or he can use it to force a departure from certain territories. He doesn't need me destroyed. He needs me weakened enough to be negotiable. And I'm the instrument for that. You were the instrument for establishing the association, he said. Now that it's unraveling, you're a potential instrument for something else. Leverage, she said, yes. She looked at him steadily. You mean if he has me, he has something to hold over you? The word me sat between them with its full weight. Bennett said nothing, which was its own answer. She turned away from the counter and looked at Jamie on the couch for a moment, at her son in his hoodie and his pajama pants, holding himself still and responsible in the orange glow of the fish tank light. Then she turned back. What do we do? She said. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Marcus, one word Fulton. He looked up. I need to go. You're staying here with 2 of my people outside until I... No, she said, Evelyn. You said I'd be in the room, she said. You said that. Non-negotiable, your word. That was about Vivian. This is where it ends, she said, all of it. Vivian, Kane, the documents. My name on things I've never touched. You said I'd be in the room. He looked at her. She looked back. There's a 7-year-old boy on that couch, he said. I know, she said. That's exactly why I'm going. She turned to Jamie. Bud, she said. Her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but warmer, the register she used with him that was different from every other register she used with anyone else. I need you to stay here with Mr. Blackwood's people for a little while, okay? I need to go sort something out. Jamie looked at her. Is it the thing with Aunt Vivian? He said. Evelyn went very still. What do you know about that? She said carefully. I heard you on the phone, he said, a few days ago. You didn't know I was awake. He paused. She did something bad, didn't she? Yes, Evelyn said. She did. Are you going to fix it? Yes. Jamie looked at Bennett, then back at his mother. Okay, he said, but you have to text me. I'll text you, she said. She kissed the top of his head quickly, without ceremony, the way you do when time is short, and the gesture matters more than its elaboration. She picked up her jacket. They were in the car 4 minutes after Bennett had knocked on her door. The drive to Fulton took 9 minutes. The warehouse was a long, low building in the meatpacking corridor west of downtown cold storage operation on the ground floor, legitimate business. Refrigerated trucks coming and going on a schedule that gave Kane's other operations the cover of ordinary commerce. Marcus had been watching the perimeter for 20 minutes by the time Bennett's car arrived and had located 2 men on the south entry and 1 on the northeast corner of the roof. Shep had the building's secondary entrance open. They went in through the loading dock. Cold hit immediately, the industrial cold of a space designed to preserve things, the kind that doesn't just touch the skin, but finds the spaces between layers and settles there. The dock smelled like refrigerant and concrete and the faint metallic undertone of the freezer units running in the back. Evelyn did not react to the cold or the smell. She moved with Bennett through the dock's interior, staying close, not crowding him, keeping her footsteps quiet in a way that suggested she was paying attention to what his feet were doing and calibrating accordingly. He noticed. He did not comment. Marcus led them through a corridor that ran alongside the freezer units, their low mechanical hum providing cover for the sound of movement. At the end of the corridor, a set of stairs led up to a second-floor office space that ran the length of the building, the kind of space that serves as the management layer for operations that need the appearance of administration. Kane was in the office. He was not alone. There were 3 men with him, none of them people Bennett recognized, positioned around the office in the arrangement of people who are present for a specific purpose. Near the window, which looked down at the loading dock through thick, dirty glass, stood Vivian Whitmore. She was wearing the same coat she had worn to the restaurant, which struck Bennett as the kind of detail that wouldn't have meant anything an hour ago, and now meant something he couldn't fully articulate, that she had left her apartment in a hurry, or that she had been brought here rather than coming of her own accord, or both. Robert Kane was 61 years old and had the look of a man who had spent those years in rooms where being underestimated was a strategic asset. He was not large. He was not physically imposing. He had gray hair cut close and the kind of face that arranged itself into an expression of permanent, mild reasonableness. The face of someone who understood that visible anger was a waste of energy when well-timed patience could accomplish the same result at a fraction of the cost. He looked at Bennett when Bennett came through the office door. He looked at Evelyn. His expression did not change. You're faster than I expected, he said. I thought we had another few hours. You thought wrong, Bennett said. Kane's eyes moved to Evelyn. Ms. Whitmore. He said her name the way you say a location on a map, identifying it, orienting around it. I'm sorry you've been inconvenienced. Are you? She said. The inconvenience was a means to an end, he said. Nothing personal. You used my sister to destroy my life, she said. That's personal. Your sister made her own decisions, Kane said. He glanced at Vivian, who had not moved from the window, with full knowledge of what she was participating in. Vivian said nothing. She was looking at Evelyn, with an expression that Evelyn had never seen on her sister's face, not the performed emotions, not the calculated warmth or the calculated cruelty, but something underneath all of that, something rawer and more confused, as though the situation had moved past the script she had rehearsed, and she was now standing in territory she had not prepared for. Vivian, Evelyn said. Vivian's jaw moved. She looked away. This is between you and me, Bennett said to Kane. The routes, the territories, whatever grievance you've been running this operation on. It's between you and me. She's not part of it. She was part of it the moment you sat down across from her, Kane said. I didn't manufacture that. You made that choice. I'm making a different choice now, Bennett said. Remove her from the documentation. Call off whatever secondary submissions you have scheduled. And we talk directly. Without this about what you actually want. Kane looked at him for a moment. What I want, he said, is what you declined 3 years ago. Access to the North Corridor routes. shared territory on the processing infrastructure along the lakefront, and a formal acknowledgement not in writing, but acknowledge that my operation has standing in this city. That's a different conversation than the one you started, Bennett said. It was always the same conversation, Kane said. You just refused to have it 3 years ago. This was the price of refusing. The price, Evelyn said, was my son knowing his mother was under federal investigation. The price was my clinic. The price was my name on things I've never touched. Her voice was level. Dangerously level, the level of something that is under pressure from below and holding the surface still through pure structural integrity. You call that a conversation. I call it something else. Kane looked at her with the mild, reasonable expression. Ms. Whitmore, he said, you are extraordinarily articulate for someone in a very bad position. I've been in bad positions before, she said. I'm still here. Something moved across Kane's face so brief that Bennett almost missed it. Not respect, not exactly. The adjustment that a person makes when they have miscalculated the variable in front of them. One of Kane's men shifted his weight slightly near the left wall. Marcus tracked the movement without appearing to. Shep was near the door. The geometry of the room was not favorable. Kane had the high ground in terms of numbers, though not in terms of what each number was capable of, which was a different kind of arithmetic. Here's what I'm prepared to do, Bennett said. The federal inquiry ends. The documentation is retracted. Ms. Whitmore's name is cleared. And then you and I sit down in a room without any of this around us, and we have the conversation about routes and territories that you apparently needed to burn down an innocent woman's life to arrange. And in exchange, Kane said, in exchange you call off whatever you have pending. Tonight, in front of me. Kane looked at him for a long time. You'd negotiate with me, he said, after this. I'd negotiate with anyone who gives me a reason to, Bennett said. You chose a complicated way to ask for a meeting. But the meeting is the meeting. Kane was quiet. The freezer units hummed below them. Somewhere on the other side of the building, a truck was maneuvering in the dock, its reversing signal a faint, muffled beep coming through the floor. Then Kane looked at Vivian. Tell her, he said. Vivian's head came up. Tell her what she doesn't know yet, Kane said. His voice was mild. Still mild, since we're having a moment of honesty. Vivian looked at Evelyn. Something in her face was fighting itself, two things pulling in opposite directions, neither of them winning cleanly. Vivian, Evelyn said. Vivian's mouth opened. The clinic, she said. The grant, the one from the Harlow Foundation. Evelyn stared at her. The Harlow Foundation. Evelyn knew that grant it was the largest single grant the clinic had ever received. Awarded 8 months ago, 2-year commitment that had funded the expansion of the pediatric services and hired 2 additional staff members and paid for equipment they had been making do without for 3 years. It was the grant that had changed what the clinic could do. It was the reason Dr. Hennessy had not had to make cuts in the spring. Harlow Foundation, Evelyn said very quietly. It's Kane's, Vivian said. The foundation. It's a legitimate nonprofit, but it's Kane's money behind it. She stopped. Her voice was doing something it very rarely did. It was unsteady. I told him about the clinic, about you working there, about the grant that was pending. He made sure it went through. The room was very quiet. Before the restaurant, Evelyn said. Before all of this, before Vivian said why. Vivian's jaw worked. He needed a way into you, to your life. Something that would make you feel something that connected you to him before any of it started, so that if it ever needed to be used. She stopped. The grant was leverage they could deploy if the frame needed additional support. If they needed to show that you had an ongoing financial relationship with Kane's organization. Evelyn stood absolutely still. The Harlow Foundation grant. The grant that had funded the children's health services. The grant that 2 additional staff members had been hired on. The equipment, the expanded hours. The children who come to my clinic, Evelyn said. Pediatric services. That expansion was funded by... Yes, Vivian said. Evelyn closed her eyes, just for a moment. 3 seconds, maybe 4. When she opened them, something had changed in her face, not collapsed, not broken, but reorganized. Stripped of every layer except the one that was load-bearing. Does that money need to be returned? She said. Her voice was addressed to Bennett. No, he said. If his organization, the foundation is legitimate, Bennett said. The money is clean, your clinic keeps it. She nodded. One nod, tight, then she looked at Vivian. Why, she said. I need to understand why, not the plan, not Kane's reasons. Your reasons, she waited. You're my sister, we grew up in the same house. You have your own money, your own life, your own everything. Vivian looked at the window. You don't need me, Vivian said. Evelyn waited. You never needed me, Vivian said. You never called asking for help. You never fell apart. You had Jamie, you had the clinic, you had this thing you do where everything is hard and you just do it anyway, and you never once asked me to." She stopped. Her voice had lost the careful modulation she maintained in public, the social instrument she deployed with such precision. It was raw now, rough in the way of something that has been under pressure for a long time. "You didn't need anyone. And then you walked into that restaurant, and some man I've been trying to get an introduction to for 3 years sat down across from you within 5 minutes, and you didn't even know who he was." The room was silent. "So you decided to destroy me," Evelyn said. "I decided to make you need something," Vivian said. "I didn't think it would," she stopped. "I didn't think Kane would." Another stop. "It was supposed to be embarrassing. It got bigger than I intended." "You built a backup system of documentation," Evelyn said, "with timed submissions. That's not something that got bigger than you intended. That's something you planned." Vivian said nothing. "Kane built the backup," Bennett said to Evelyn, not defending Vivian, stating the accurate sequence of events. "Did you know about it?" Evelyn said to Vivian. A pause. "I suspected," Vivian said, "and you let it happen." No answer. Evelyn looked at her sister for a long moment, looked at her the way you look at something you have been carrying for so long that you've forgotten what the weight feels like until the moment you put it down. "I'm done," she said, not to Kane, not to the room, to Vivian specifically, just those 2 words. Quiet as a door closing on a room that no longer has anything in it. Vivian flinched. That was the thing that finally got through, not the anger, not the accusation, not the documentation or the investigation or any of the elaborate architecture of damage. Quiet, the finality, the absence of anything left to fight over. Bennett turned back to Kane. "We're leaving," he said. "All of us. And you're going to make 3 calls. In the next 30 minutes, your contact in the federal inquiry, the account holding the timed submissions, and whoever you have watching the north side of this operation to stand down. I'm going to be watching all 3 happen in real time." "And the negotiation," Kane said. 2 weeks from tonight. Neutral location. "My lawyer, your lawyer, and you and I in the same room for as long as it takes." Bennett looked at him. "You wanted the meeting. You have the meeting." Kane considered this. He was calculating. Bennett could see the calculation happening, the assessment of variables and outcomes, the same arithmetic that Kane had been running for the past months and was now running in the compressed time frame of the immediate moment. The balance had shifted. Not because Bennett had more power in this room numerically, he didn't, and Kane knew it. But because the move Kane had built his strategy around had been exposed, and an exposed strategy is a leveraged one. And Kane had not survived 61 years by failing to recognize when the leverage had switched hands. "Agreed," Kane said. He took out his phone. He made the first call in front of them as required. Then the second. Marcus was monitoring both in real time, running verification through channels that confirmed within 90 seconds that the submissions had been deactivated. The third call, the federal contact, would take longer to verify, but Edmund was already working the documentation angle from the legal side, and between the 2 of them, the inquiry would be a different shape by morning. Bennett turned to Evelyn. She was standing in the center of the cold office with her jacket on and her hands at her sides, her breath just barely visible in the refrigerated air, the faintest plume, rhythmic, controlled. She was looking at Vivian. Vivian had not moved from the window. She was looking at the floor. Her hands were folded in front of her in the posture of someone who has been holding a structure up for a long time and has just felt it come down and is still adjusting to the changed weight distribution, still figuring out how to stand without it. "Come on," Bennett said to Evelyn. She did not move immediately. She stood there for 3 more seconds, looking at her sister. Then she turned and walked toward the door, and Bennett followed her, and Marcus and Shep followed him. And the cold of the warehouse followed all of them down the stairs and through the loading dock and out into the October night, where the air was a different kind of cold, not mechanical, not preserved, but real. The cold of the actual world in actual autumn, with actual stars faint above the light pollution, and a truck idling somewhere nearby, and the city going on around them in all its ordinary noise. Evelyn stopped outside. She put her hands in her jacket pockets and looked up at the sky for a moment. Then she said, "Is it over?" "Most of it," Bennett said. "What's left?" "The documentation takes time to retract completely. The inquiry will close, but not overnight. And the room you wanted." He paused. "Vivian is still in that building." Evelyn brought her gaze down from the sky. "I don't want the room with Vivian anymore," she said. He looked at her. "I wanted to be in the room when you confronted her," she said. I heard what she said. She looked at the warehouse door, the metal surface of it, the ordinary industrial fact of it. "I don't need anything from her. I don't need her to explain more or apologize better or make it make sense." There isn't a version of her explanation that changes anything. She looked at Bennett. What I need is my name off those documents, and my clinic intact, and my son to sleep through the rest of this. The first two are in motion, he said. The third depends on how fast you can get back. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, the musculature of a smile. Its precursor, the shape your face makes before it decides whether to complete the expression or not. Take me back, she said. They were in the car and moving when his phone went again. Marcus, from the building, 2 words. Bennett read them. He looked at the message for 3 seconds. What? Evelyn said. He showed her the screen. The message read, Vivian talking. Wants deal, Kane's full operation dates, routes, accounts. Everything. Evelyn stared at the screen. She handed the phone back. Is that useful to you? She said. Extremely, he said. She looked out the window at the city moving past. Then use it, she said. But I don't want to know the details. He nodded. The car moved through the night. Bennett looked at the message again. Vivian Whitmore, the woman, who had constructed an elaborate destruction of her sister's life out of something that was equal parts jealousy and desperation, and the particular kind of cruelty that grows in the dark when someone has been comparing themselves to another person for 30 years, and losing every time in ways only they was now sitting in a cold warehouse office and help's office, offering everything she had on a man who had recruited her and used her, and left her standing at a window with nowhere to go. It was not justice, it was not neat. It was the way things actually ended in the world. He moved through not with clean resolutions and clear moral accounting, but with exhausted people making transactional decisions in refrigerated rooms at 3 in the morning, trading what they had for what they needed, the mechanics of consequence grinding forward without elegance or satisfaction. He looked at Evelyn. She was leaning her head against the window. Her eyes were closed. She was not asleep. Her breathing was too controlled, too deliberate. The breathing of someone who is very tired and is using the discipline they have spent years building to manage the gap between how tired they are and how much further they still need to go. Your son is okay, Bennett said. I know, she said, without opening her eyes. Clinic will be okay. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. You did well tonight, he said. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't manage me. Don't tell me I did well, like I'm someone you're assessing. She said it without anger, just precision. The same precision she applied to everything, the refusal to accept a version of herself that someone else had constructed. I did what I had to do. That's different from doing well. He nodded. Fair enough, he said. She looked back out the window. And then the car slowed, and the driver said something low from the front seat that Bennett heard, but Evelyn did not. And Bennett looked at the street outside and felt the specific quality of wrong that comes from pattern recognitions before conscious thought catches up something displaced. Something that should not be where it was. A detail that was out of sequence in the visual grammar of the block. He put his hand on Evelyn's arm. Don't move, he said. She went still instantly. A car was parked outside her building. A dark sedan, engine off but warm. He could see the faint distortion of heat off the hood in the cold air. It had not been there when they left. Clara's two people at the entrance were in different positions than they had been when he had come Callan, not the repositioning of people conducting normal surveillance rotation, but the repositioning of people who have been moved. His phone was already in his hand. He called the nearer of Clara's people. No answer. He called the second number. No answer said. He looked at Marcus, who had come out of the second car and was standing on the curb, reading the same visual grammar and arriving at the same reading. Building, Marcus said quietly, toward the radio on his lapel. Pause, came back one word, tight, occupied. Bennett's hand tightened on Evelyn's arm without meaning to an involuntary thing, the body's response to information before the mind has finished processing it. Evelyn felt it. Jamie, she said, and he could not tell her it was fine, because he did not yet know if it was fine, and she was not a person he could manage with a version of the truth that was easier than the actual one, and so he said nothing, which told her everything, and he watched her face do the thing that he had not seen it do before, not crack, not collapse, but harden, in the specific way that a person hardens when they have arrived at the point beyond which there is nothing left to protect, and therefore nothing left to lose, and they become, in that moment, something the people who have underestimated them have never prepared for. Evelyn was out of the car before Bennett finished saying her name. Not reckless, targeted. There is a difference between someone who moves without thinking and someone who moves with the kind of thinking that has compressed itself past language into something more fundamental, and Evelyn was the second kind. She was across the sidewalk and at the building door in 4 strides, and Bennett was a half step behind her with Marcus flanking left. And nobody said stop or wait or let us go first, because she had already made those arguments irrelevant with the speed of her body. The lobby was empty. Clara's first person was near the stairwell door, seated against the wall, conscious, one hand pressed to the side of his head, where something had connected with enough force to take him out of the operational picture without killing him. He looked up when Evelyn came through the door and said, "Third floor." Two of them. One went up 6 minutes ago. Evelyn was already moving. Bennett caught her arm at the base of the stairs. Not hard. Firm. "Listen to me," he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were doing the thing he had seen them do in the warehouse, that stripped down, load-bearing quality. Everything non-essential already gone. "There are two of them," he said. "They're not there to hurt him. If they wanted to hurt him, they would have done it and been gone. They're there because they knew we'd come back, and they want the same thing. Cain wanted something to hold." "My son is not something to hold," she said. "I know that," he said. "Which is why we go up there and we do this right. Not fast."
Right.
She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she nodded. They went up. Marcus took the stairwell door at the 3rd floor. Slowly the handle turned without sound. The door opened the width of a hand, and he read the hallway through the gap for 15 seconds before signaling. Clear to Evelyn's door. Light visible through the gap at the bottom. Movement inside, not distressed movement. The low sound of a television turned on, which was either a good sign or a calculated one. Bennett knocked. The sound of the television went away. A voice from inside. Male, flat. The voice of someone doing a job. "Who is it?" "Bennett Blackwood," Bennett said. His voice was exactly what it always was, the same register, the same pace, the same quality of restraint that made it carry without volume. "Open the door." A pause. "You're supposed to call a number," the voice said. "I'm not calling a number," Bennett said. "I'm standing at the door." "Open it." Another pause longer. The sound of movement, 2 sets of feet, not one. A brief, low exchange between them that Evelyn couldn't make out from the hallway. She was standing with her shoulder against the wall, her jaw set, her hands loose at her sides. She had stopped herself from pressing her ear to the door because she understood that what she needed right now was whatever remained of her patience. The door opened. The man who opened it was mid-30s, not large but dense, in the way of someone who has trained for utility, rather than appearance, someone built to be functional in a range of situations rather than impressive in any one of them. He looked at Bennett, and then looked at Evelyn, and then looked at Marcus behind them. "Where's the kid?" Evelyn said. "He's fine," the man said. "I didn't ask if he was fine," she said. "I asked where he is." The man stepped back. Jamie was on the couch. He was sitting upright, both feet on the floor, his hands in his lap, in the position of a child who has decided that sitting correctly is the most effective form of protest available to him. He had Torpedo's tank on the cushion beside him. He must have moved it from the windowsill himself, at some point in the preceding 6 minutes, for reasons that were either comfort or the same instinct that made him talk to Rosalie in the restaurant. The need to have something alive nearby when everything else was uncertain. He looked at Evelyn when she came through the door. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was steady. It cost him something. She could see that it cost him, could see the slight over-control around his mouth, the eyes that were doing more work than usual to stay level, but he held it, and she moved to the couch and sat beside him and put her arm around him, and he leaned into her side with the full weight of 7 years and 6 minutes of being very, very brave. "Hey, bud," she said, into the top of his head. The Sekhmet's man, who had been seen standing near the kitchen, which was where she would have positioned herself to control the exits in a small apartment, looked at Bennett. "Cain's deal is off," Bennett said. "You know that already, or you wouldn't still be here with the television on. Which means you stayed, because you're waiting to see which way this lands." The man said nothing. "Here's how it lands," Bennett said. "You walk out of this apartment. You call whoever you report to, and you tell them the Whitmore leverage is gone and the operation is closed. And then you make a decision about what you do next. That is entirely your own business, as long as it doesn't come near this address again." The man looked at his partner. His partner looked at Evelyn and Jamie on the couch, at the fish tank with its slightly tilted fish circling, at the kitchen counter with the unfinished mug of tea, and the ordinary detritus of an ordinary life that had been used as a playing piece in a game it had nothing to do with. He looked back at Bennett. "We're gone," he said. They left. Marcus followed them to the stairwell and stayed there until he heard the lobby door, then the exterior door, then sent a confirmation to Bennett's phone that said simply, "Clear." The apartment was quiet. Jamie had not moved from Evelyn's side. He had his head against her arm and was looking at the fish tank with the contemplative patience of someone who has processed a great deal in a short time and has arrived at a place that is not understanding but is adjacent to it, the place where you stop asking what it means and start simply noting that it has happened. "Is it over?" he said, the same words she had used. "Outside the warehouse in the cold." "Yes," she said. "For real this time." "For real," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Torpedo didn't like those guys," he said. He kept swimming into the corner. Evelyn looked at the fish, who was in fact doing exactly that, pressing its nose against the glass in the corner nearest the wall, circling back, pressing again, with the persistent, slightly tragic determination of a creature whose relationship with its own limitations was ongoing and unresolved. "He'll be okay," Evelyn said. "I know," Jamie said. "Always is." Bennett was standing near the door. He had not sat down. He was in the posture he used when he was in a space where he did not have a defined role present, watchful, uncertain, in a way he did not often permit himself to be uncertain. Evelyn looked at him over the top of Jamie's head. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds and contained the approximate content of a much longer conversation that neither of them had the capacity for tonight. He left at 2:20 in the morning. He did not say anything substantial on his way out, just a few words to Marcus in the hallway, and then a pause at the door where he looked at Evelyn, and she looked at him, and he said, "I'll have Edmund call you in the morning." And she said, "Okay." And that was all. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, the elevator, the building door. She sat on the couch with her son until his breathing slowed and his weight became the bonesless weight of actual sleep. And then she sat for a while longer without moving, because moving felt like an effort she was not ready to make. And the couch was warm where Jamie was against her, and Torpedo was swimming his slightly diagonal circuits in the tank, and the apartment was hers exactly as it had always been. The same surfaces and the same light and the same specific quality of silence, all of it unchanged and all of it somehow different. She did not sleep. She made tea she did not drink, and sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside the window shifted from black to the particular dark blue that comes before gray. And then she went to check on Jamie, and then she came back and sat some more. At 5:40 in the morning, she picked up her phone. She looked at Vivian's name in her contacts for a long time. She did not call. She put the phone down. She had meant what she said in the warehouse. "I'm done," 2 words. And she was not in the explosive, declarative way of someone who needs the other person to register the ending, but in the quiet, structural way of someone who has examined the weight of something they have been carrying and made the practical decision that they cannot carry it any further. Not because it is too heavy and they are too weak, but because they have finally understood that the carrying itself is the problem, that the thing she had been carrying was not love for her sister, but the obligation to keep managing the consequences of her sister's choices, to absorb the damage and keep moving, to be the person who did not break so that Vivian could keep breaking things. She was done with that. She thought about what Vivian had said in the warehouse. "You don't need anyone. You never called asking for help. You never fell apart," and she turned it over the way you turn something over when you're trying to find the piece of it that is actually true underneath the piece that is accusation. Because there was something true in it, even wrapped in the wrong context with the wrong intention. She had not asked for help. She had not, over the years that Vivian had watched her manage and endure and continue, picked up a phone and said, "I'm struggling," in a way that had any weight to it. She had said it in the small ways, the offhand ways, but not in the real way. Not in the way that makes a request. She had not done it with Vivian because Vivian was not safe. But she had not done it with anyone. She sat with that until the sky was gray. Then she got up and made breakfast for Jamie, and when he appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7, with his hair at 3 different angles and Torpedo's tank tucked under one arm, he said, "We're out of the good cereal." And she said, "We have eggs." And he said, "I don't want eggs. I want the good cereal." And she looked at him in his hoodie and his pajama pants, with the fish tank under his arm in the early morning light, and she started laughing. And he looked at her like she had briefly lost her mind, and then he started laughing too. And they stood in the kitchen laughing about cereal and the fish tank and nothing in particular until the sound of it had used up whatever had been sitting in her chest since 2 in the morning. "Eggs," she said again when they had stopped. "Fine," he said. "But with cheese," she agreed. Edmund called at 9:15. He spoke for 11 minutes. The federal inquiry was being formally closed on the basis of new documentation establishing the fabricated nature of the original submissions, a process that would take several weeks administratively, but was, as of this morning, directionally complete. Evelyn's name would be removed from all associated records. Clinic would receive a formal letter of clearance, that doctor. Hennessy could place in whatever filing system made him feel most secure. Edmund was a careful man who did not say more than was necessary, but at the end of the call he said, "Miss Whitmore, for what it's worth, this kind of frame is not easy to build, and it's not easy to dismantle. You've handled yourself well throughout." She thought about what she had said to Bennett in the car. "Don't tell me I did well, like I'm someone you're assessing." "Thank you, Edmund," she said, because Edmund had earned the acknowledgement in a way that was different, and she knew the difference. She went to the clinic. Dr. Hennessy was at his desk when she arrived, working through patient files with the focused, slightly rumpled energy of a man who had been at his desk since before most people were awake. He looked up when she came in. He had not asked her directly what had been happening over the past 2 weeks, not because he didn't see it, but because he was the kind of person who understood that some things needed to be resolved before they could be discussed, and that his job in the interim was to hold the space steady. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. He looked at her for a moment, at her face, which was tired in the way that faces are tired after a night of no sleep and a great deal of everything else. "It's handled," she said. He nodded. "The grant," she said. "The Harlow Foundation grant. There's something about its origin that I need to tell you. It shouldn't affect the clinic's standing, but you need to know." He took his glasses off and set them on the desk, which was his version of giving something his full attention. Not everything, the parts that were relevant. The connection between the foundation and the operation that had tried to use the clinic as a piece of a larger design. She told him the money was clean, that the services it had funded were not compromised, that the inquiry which he had known about, though she had not told him everything, was closing. He sat with it. "The children who've been seen in the expanded pediatric hours," he said after a moment. "Those appointments happened. That care happened. Whatever the origin of the funding, those kids came in and got seen. Then we do what we've always done," he said. "We make sure the next grant comes from somewhere we've vetted more carefully, and we keep going." She looked at him. 61 years old, 30 of them spent in this kind of work. And he still said we keep going with the exact same flatness and certainty that he might use to say the building is on the corner, as though it were simply an observable fact about the universe rather than a choice that required renewing every single day. "Yeah," she said, "we do." She sat at her desk and worked until 6 in the evening, and at 6 she picked up Jamie from Mrs. Garza's, and they walked home together through the October evening, with Jamie telling her about a disagreement he had with a kid at school over the correct pronunciation of a word, that neither of them had been pronouncing correctly, and she listened and offered her opinion and was corrected and accepted the correction, and the streets were exactly what they always were, the same corners, the same storefronts, the same specific gravity of a neighborhood that had its own weight and texture and history. A place that was hers not because of anything she had accumulated, but because of everything she had done there. The paper boat arrived in a small box 3 days later. It was not the original. The original was still wherever Rosalie kept it, which was, as Bennett had said, the night of the restaurant, beside her when she slept. This one had been made by Rosalie herself. Evelyn understood, from the quality of the folds, careful but imperfect, the way things are when someone has studied a result and tried to reproduce it with attention and without full understanding. Slightly asymmetrical. One side sat a little higher than the other. It would probably list if you put it in water. There was a note with it. Rosalie's handwriting, printed in the deliberate block letters of a child who is still in the process of making her own handwriting readable. It said, "Mine didn't turn out perfect, but I think that's okay." Our Evelyn held the note for a long time. Then she put both the boat and the note on the shelf in her bedroom where she kept the things that mattered: the photograph of Jamie on the day he was born, her parents' wedding picture, a stone she had taken from a lake in Michigan, the summer she was 19, and thought was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Small things. Things that did not look like much from the outside. She put Rosalie's imperfect boat among them. It listed slightly to the left. She left it exactly as it was. Bennett came to the clinic 2 weeks after the inquiry closed. Not announced, not arranged. He appeared at the door at 4:30 on a Wednesday afternoon with the specific quality of someone who has thought a great deal about whether to come and has arrived at a decision that is not entirely comfortable. He was not in a suit. He was in the kind of clothes a person wears when they are not performing anything: dark jacket, no tie, the absence of the deliberate professional armor she had seen him in every other time. He looked different without it. Not smaller, that was not the word. More accurately proportioned, less curated. She came to the waiting area when the receptionist told her someone was asking for her. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're not sick," she said. "No," he said. "Then you're either here about the documentation or you're here about something else." "Something else," he said. She looked at him for another moment. "Come to the back," she said. They sat in the conference room, the same small room, with the folding table and 4 chairs and the window into the hallway where she had sat with the federal investigators 8 weeks earlier. The proportions of the room were the same. The light was the same. Everything in the room was the same. Everything in the room and the context of being in it was completely different, and she was aware of that layering in the specific way you are aware of it when you have survived something and returned to the location where it started. "Rosalie starts talking," he said. "Not a lot, not easily. But she's starting, I know," Evelyn said. "She sent me a boat." Something moved across his face, surprised, and then not surprised, and then something softer than either. "She made it herself," he said. "I know that too," Evelyn said. "It lists. She's aware," he said. "She's been trying to fix it for a week. I told her maybe it didn't need to be fixed." Evelyn looked at him. "You told her that?" she said. "Apparently," he said. "I'm capable of learning things." She held his gaze for a moment. "How is she?" Evelyn said. "Really? Not the version you tell people who ask out of politeness." He considered the question. "She drew a picture last week," he said. 4 people. She showed it to me and said, 'That's you and that's me and that's Jamie and that's Evelyn,' in that order." He paused. "She hadn't drawn people in 8 months." Evelyn breathed in slowly. "What about you?" she said. "What about me? How are you? Really?" He looked at the table between them, the folding table, the institutional surface of it, the scratch along one edge that had probably been there for years. He looked at it the way people look at neutral surfaces when they are deciding how honest to be. "I fired 7 people," he said, "restructured 3 operations. Spent 4 weeks closing the gaps that Kane had identified in our framework, gaps I should have identified before he did. He paused. The negotiation with Kane happened. It was not pleasant. The roots were renegotiated. The territorial acknowledgement was made in terms that my lawyer described as legally meaningless but symbolically significant, which is, apparently, sometimes the best available outcome. That's not what I asked, she said. He was quiet. No, he said, it isn't. He looked up from the table. I'm tired, he said. It came out simply, without performance, just the word, placed on the table between them like something he had been carrying long enough to put down. I've been doing this for a long time, longer than most people who do it, and I'm very good at it, which in some ways makes it worse the better you are at something, the harder it is to admit that the thing itself is wearing you down. She looked at him without filling the silence. Rosala drawing 4 people, he said. That was the first time in 8 months that I felt like I was in the right place, doing the right thing, whatever that means. He stopped. I know that's not a small statement. No, she said. It isn't. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here with a proposition or a negotiation. I'm not here to tell you that I've changed and therefore you owe me something. He looked at her steadily. I'm here because I wanted to see you. Outside of a crisis, outside of something going wrong, I wanted to see what that was like. Evelyn sat with that. It's outside the conference room window. The hallway of the clinic moved in its ordinary rhythm. A patient walking to the waiting area, the receptionist crossing toward the filing room. The ordinary human traffic of a place where people came because something hurt and they needed someone to help them figure out what to do about it. My sister called, she said. He waited. I didn't answer, she said. She left a message. It was 3 minutes long, and I listened to about 40 seconds of it before I stopped. She looked at the table. Not because I was angry, because I could tell she was doing the thing she does when she wants to manage an outcome, the warmth, the pacing, the specific way she builds toward what she actually wants to say. And I realized I knew all of her techniques. I'd always known them. I just kept letting them work anyway because she was my sister, and I thought that meant I was supposed to. What did you do with the message, she said. I deleted it, she said, and I felt she paused, looking for the right word, the accurate one. Relieved, just very quiet and very relieved, which surprised me. She looked up. I thought I'd feel guilty, do you, he said. A little, she said. But it's the kind of guilt that tells you something is over. Not the kind that tells you you've done something wrong. I've been wrong about that distinction before. He nodded. They sat in the small room with the folding table and the clinic noise outside and the October light coming through the hallway window at the particular low angle of late afternoon. And it was nothing like the restaurant, not the amber chandeliers, not the performance of wealth and belonging and deliberate placement. It was folding chairs and institutional lighting, and the slight smell of antiseptic that lived in every room of this building. And it was more real than that restaurant had ever been. And they were both in it without borrowed dress or professional armor or the careful management of what their faces revealed. Jamie wants to meet Rosalie again, Evelyn said. Rosalie has mentioned Jamie approximately 8 times in the past 2 weeks, Bennett said. Which for context is 8 times more than she mentioned anyone except me for 8 months. Evelyn almost smiled. The full version of it, this time not the precursor, not the shape without the completion. We could do something small, she said, the 4 of us. Something that doesn't require anyone to be impressive or managed. Like what? I don't know, she said, something ordinary. Park, lunch somewhere that doesn't have a dress code. She looked at him. Somewhere with prices on the menu. He looked back at her. All right, he said. I need you to understand something, she said. Before we go anywhere or do anything, I need you to understand it clearly. Tell me, he said. I'm not interested in being managed, she said. I'm not interested in being protected in the way that means kept separate from information. I'm not interested in being a part of your life that you wall off from the parts you consider too complicated for me. She held his gaze. If something involves me, my name, my clinic, my son, anything, I'm in the room. That's not negotiable, and it doesn't expire. I know, he said. I mean it beyond the next difficult situation, she said. I mean it structurally. I understand that, he said. And I'm telling you that I know. Not as a concession. As something I actually believe about how this would have to work, if it works at all. She looked at him. Okay, she said. It was not a grand capitulation. It was not the end of uncertainty or the beginning of something uncomplicated. It was two people in folding chairs in a small room at the end of a very long 8 weeks, with tired eyes and the ordinary specific weight of everything they had separately survived, agreeing to try something that had no guarantee and no clean edges and no script. It was, she thought, the most honest thing she had done in a long time. She walked him out through the waiting room, past the receptionist, who very carefully did not make eye contact, and at the clinic door he stopped and turned. The boat she made, he said, the one that lists. What about it, she said. She put it in water, he said, in a bowl in her room, to see if it would float. Did it, Evelyn said. Yes, he said, sideways and slightly wrong. But it floated. He left. She stood at the clinic door and watched the street for a moment, just the ordinary street in the ordinary late afternoon, the light going amber on the building faces, a kid on a bike cutting through the crosswalk against the light, a woman walking a dog that was too big for the leash and straining forward with cheerful, useless force. She went back inside. The weeks that followed were not a resolution in the way that stories describe resolutions: clean lines, settled accounts, the sense of a mechanism completing its cycle. They were ordinary, which is a different thing entirely, and in some ways a better one. Ordinary meant Jamie bringing home a school project about ecosystems and insisting that Torpedo constituted a valid primary source. Ordinary meant Dr. Hennessy writing the new grant application with the kind of institutional rigor that came from having learned something expensive. Ordinary meant the pediatric hours continuing, the patients coming, the work going on in the specific way that necessary work goes on, regardless of what surrounds it. The four of them went to a park on a Saturday in November. It was cold enough that their breath was visible. Jamie had found, somewhere in the logistics of the morning, a specific puddle that he considered scientifically interesting and had spent 20 minutes explaining its properties to Rosalie, who had listened with the serious, total attention she brought to things that interested her. She had not said a great deal. She had said enough. She had asked 2 questions, both of them good ones, the kind that came from actual engagement rather than social performance, and Jamie had answered them with the focused pleasure of someone whose expertise has been taken seriously. Evelyn watched them from a bench. Bennett sat beside her. They were not holding hands. They were sitting the way people sit when they are genuinely comfortable, rather than performing comfort, close enough that the cold was less present, far enough that neither was in the other's space, in the particular easy proximity of 2 people who have stopped calculating the distance and started simply being at whatever distance they happen to be. She asked him about Torpedo, Bennett said. I know, Evelyn said. He's been talking about that fish for 20 minutes. She's never asked anyone about their pets before, he said. She doesn't usually ask questions. She waits for information to arrive. Asking is harder, Evelyn said. It means you want something from the person, that you're willing to want something. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That's exactly what it means. She looked at him. He was watching Rosalie, his daughter in her winter coat gesturing at the puddle while Jamie explained something with the full theatrical investment of a child who has found an audience. His face in this moment was the face she had seen the night of the restaurant when Rosalie's finger had touched the edge of the paper boat open, in the way that faces rarely allow themselves to be open. The armor that had made him a man who could empty a room by walking into it, set aside not as a strategy but as an actual choice, a daily ongoing choice that cost something every time it was made and was worth it every time too. What happened with Kane, she said. Long term, is it stable? Stable enough, he said. He got what he needed. He has no incentive to escalate and several reasons not to. He paused. The information Vivian gave us about his operation has been. He stopped. Let's say it's been strategically cataloged. Insurance, she said. She nodded. And Vivian, she said, what happens to her? That's not my decision, he said. She made a deal. The terms of that deal are between her and the people she made it with. What she does with her life after that is her own. Evelyn looked at the puddle, at the two children crouched beside it now, with their breath clouding in the cold air. She's going to try to contact me again, Evelyn said. At some point. She's not the kind of person who accepts a closed door. Probably not, he said. I'll be ready for it, she said. I wasn't before. I kept the door open because I kept thinking she was going to be someone different than the person she actually was. She paused. I don't think she's going to become that person. And I think I've spent a long time grieving the sister I thought she might be, instead of accurately seeing the one she is. He said nothing. Not because he had nothing to offer. She was learning, slowly, the difference between his silences. This one was not avoidance or discomfort. It was respect. The specific kind of respect that means I believe you are handling this correctly and you do not need me to add to it. Jamie stood up from the puddle and said something to Rosalie that made her laugh, a short, genuine sound, surprised out of her, the kind of laugh that happens before the person has decided whether to allow it. Clapped one hand over her mouth, then she lowered it. Then she laughed again, properly this time, at whatever Jamie had said, and Jamie looked extremely pleased with himself, in the way that small people look extremely pleased with themselves when they have made something happen that required skill. Evelyn's chest did something complicated, not heartbreak, not its opposite, something that contained both at once the specific feeling of watching something fragile and important and hard-won exist in the world, out in the open where it could be damaged, and choosing not to cover it. She's going to be okay, Evelyn said. She said it the way you say something when you are not entirely certain, and the uncertainty itself is part of the saying. Yes, Bennett said. He said it the same way. They sat on the bench in the November cold, with the children at the puddle and the park going on around them in its ordinary Saturday way, other people walking other dogs, other kids doing other incomprehensible things with puddles and sticks, and the particular energy of children who are outside and cold and absolutely fine with both. In Evelyn's bedroom, on the shelf with the photograph and the stone from the Michigan lake and her parents' wedding picture, the imperfect paper boat sat listing slightly to the left. Rosalie had been right about it. It had not needed to turn out perfect. The things that float are not always the things built without error. Sometimes they are the things built by someone who tried, who folded and pressed and studied and reproduced from memory without all the knowledge they needed and placed the result in water anyway, and found against reasonable expectation that it held. Evelyn's had sat alone under a chandelier in a restaurant, while people she had known her whole life arranged themselves around her to watch her fail, and she had held. Not because she was not afraid, not because it did not cost her, but because she had understood, in the way that you understand things that your body knows before your mind catches up, that the moment you let other people's cruelty define the floor beneath you, you have given them the architecture of everything above it too. She had not given them that. She had sat there in a borrowed dress with the wrong shoulders and read the menu and ordered the duck confit and refused to be what they needed her to be. And that refusal, that single, quiet, pensive refusal had set in motion everything that followed. The redemption was not the love story, though the love story was real. It was not the federal inquiry closing, though that mattered enormously. It was not the clinic surviving or Rosalie laughing or Vivian losing or Kane settling. It was that Evelyn Whitmore had sat in the most visible seat in a room full of people who expected her to break, and she had not broken, and she had not known, in that moment, that not breaking would cost this much or give this much, or take this long or lead here to this bench. This park, This cold Saturday, this man beside her, and these children at a puddle, and she would not have changed any of it, not the cost, not the length, not the difficulty of any single step. She had been the joke. She had become the answer to a question nobody in that restaurant had thought to ask. Who survives? Not the loudest, not the most powerful. Not the ones with cameras or chandeliers or borrowed dress codes and inherited contempt. The ones who refuse to let the room tell them what they're worth. The ones who sit still and breathe and wait for the truth to land where it will, because they know, in the place below language, that the truth always lands. It lands and it stays and it is enough.